Your middle-class identity is a mathematical ghost. Right now, you feel secure because your bank account is in the black and your SUV smells like leather and success, but you are actually standing on a trapdoor designed to swing open the moment you trip. It takes exactly 72 hours for a lifetime of disciplined labor to evaporate into a silent mathematical wreck. This is not a story about bad luck or poor choices. It is a forensic analysis of a vampiric infrastructure, a legally sanctioned architecture designed to harvest your future before you even live it. You aren't an owner of your life. You are a tenant of an economic engine that requires your insolvency to function. The story of Mark in Raleigh is a data point in a larger trajectory. What looked like a series of unfortunate events was actually the predictable outcome of a mathematical certainty. Most people believe that debt is a personal choice or a temporary bridge to a better life. We are told that financial failure is a result of indiscipline or a lack of literacy. This is the official narrative. It is also a diversion. This is not a story about individual mistakes. This is a story about a structural transition in the global economy where debt is no longer an option, but a requirement for basic social participation. Think about what that means. We have entered an era of debt to standard of living arbitrage. This is a mechanism where the gap between stagnating wages and the rising cost of a middle-class existence is filled entirely by credit instruments. These instruments are not designed to be repaid. They are designed to be serviced. The goal of the modern financial infrastructure is not to help you own assets, but to ensure you pay for access to them for as long as possible. In this system, the interest paid over a lifetime frequently exceeds the total principal value of everything you will ever own. This is a vampiric infrastructure. It is a legally sanctioned but structurally predatory architecture that converts your future labor into a perpetual stream of extraction. It is invisible because it is presented as convenience. It is silent because it operates through user interfaces designed to remove friction from the act of borrowing. But the friction has not disappeared. It has been moved to your future. Over the next few minutes, we will perform a forensic analysis of the 10 specific mechanisms that sustain this system. We will look at how car manufacturers became banks that happen to make cars. We will examine the hidden tax required to maintain a credit score and the algorithmic traps within your phone. We will dismantle the illusion of ownership to reveal the underlying contract of extraction. Let me be precise about the architecture of your insolvency. This is how the machinery works. To understand why Mark from Raleigh saw his life evaporate in 72 hours, you must understand the fundamental gear that drives the modern economy. Most people believe that debt is a personal choice or a failure of character. This is the superficial layer of the narrative. It is the belief that the consumer is the architect of their own insolvency. But the forensic reality is different. We have entered a state of debt to standard of living arbitrage. Think about what that means. For decades, the cost of the basic components of a middle-class life, housing, education, transportation, and healthcare, has moved on a vertical trajectory while wages have remained horizontal. This created a structural deficit. This deficit is not a mistake. It is a market opportunity for the financialization of life. This is the process of converting every basic human requirement into a recurring financial product. Consider the mechanism of the spread. In banking, the spread is the difference between the cost of funds and the interest charged to the borrower. In the modern economy, the spread is the difference between your stagnant income and the rising cost of social participation. This gap is filled entirely by debt instruments. These are not tools for leverage. They are high-tension wires designed to extract a fee every time you move. You are not buying a car or a home. You are paying a subscription fee for the right to appear as if you own them. This is the vampiric infrastructure in its purest form. It is a system where your future labor is sold at a discount today to pay for the necessities of yesterday. It is an architecture of perpetual extraction, where the goal is never repayment, but the eternal servicing of the interest. You might believe that simple discipline is the exit strategy. You might think that because we have consumer regulations and financial literacy apps, the individual is protected. That is true. And we will examine exactly how those protections are structured. But first, we must look at the specific algorithmic traps within your phone that were designed to bypass your discipline before you even realize you are in danger. I promise to show you the digital traps designed to bypass your discipline, but to understand the lethality of the design, you must first look at the field of debris where the infrastructure has already failed. This is not theory. This is the forensic record of the last 2 decades. In 2008, the architecture of the middle class experienced a structural fracture. We are taught to call this the housing crisis. That is a convenient simplification. It was actually the first systemic failure of the debt to standard of living arbitrage. Think about what that means. Over 8 million American families lost their homes in the years that followed. This was not a failure of character. It was a failure of the math. Among those numbers was a construction foreman in Nevada named Thomas. He had worked 30 years to build a life. He had followed every rule. But when his home equity loan reset, his monthly payment exceeded his entire take-home pay. He watched as the bank claimed his past and his future in a single afternoon. In the industrial heartland, thousands of workers like Thomas realized that the assets they thought they owned were actually just rented liabilities. This was the moment the world learned a specific law of financial gravity. Failure was unthinkable until it happened. 3 years before that collapse, a critical legal adjustment was made. The 2005 Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act made it nearly impossible to discharge student loans. This was a structural pivot. It ensured that the debt used to enter the middle class would remain a permanent extraction mechanism, regardless of economic conditions. It converted a generation of graduates into a predictable stream of interest payments. After the wreckage of 2008, a new set of protections emerged. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was established. Regulations like the Dodd-Frank Act were signed into law. These were presented as a shield for the individual. For a moment, it felt as if the predatory era had ended. This sense of security is exactly what allows the new machinery to operate. You believe you are protected. You believe the guardrails are in place. And we will examine why that belief is your greatest vulnerability. Now you might say that the solution is simple, and that the answer lies in personal responsibility and financial literacy. You might argue that if Mark just follows the established rules, he can win. If he maintains a high credit score and invests in his education, he should eventually outpace the extraction. This is the meritocratic promise that serves as the psychological anchor for the entire middle class. It suggests that the system is a fair referee, and that if you are a responsible borrower, you will be rewarded with lower rates and greater social mobility. It is a comforting narrative because it gives the individual a sense of agency over a complex environment. It validates your discipline and makes your sacrifices feel like a strategic investment. But this belief in the rules is exactly what makes the machinery so effective. Let me be precise about the structural reality. The credit score, which was introduced in 1989, is not a measure of your financial health. It is a measure of your utility to the creditors. To maintain a high score, you must carry debt. You must service it. You must prove that you are a reliable source of interest income. This creates what I call the credit score maintenance tax. It is the structural requirement to pay interest on credit you do not need, simply to avoid a score drop that would increase your insurance premiums or future borrowing costs. It is a circular tax on the middle class. Then there is the ultimate solution offered to every young person: higher education. We are told that debt for a degree is good debt, because it increases lifetime earnings. But in 2005, the legal architecture of the United States was quietly modified. The Bankruptcy Abuse, Prevention and Consumer Protection Act made it nearly impossible to discharge student loans. This turned a generation of students into a predictable and permanent stream of interest payments. But the trap goes deeper than just the inability to declare bankruptcy. It is the mechanism of interest capitalization. This occurs when the monthly payment under a government-sanctioned repayment plan does not cover the accruing interest. That unpaid interest is then added to the principal of the loan. Think about what that means. You can make every payment on time for a decade and end up owing more than you originally borrowed. You can pay $60,000 toward a $40,000 balance and still see a remaining debt of $50,000. This is not a failure of the borrower. It is a success of the architecture. The exit strategy from the lower class has been converted into a permanent extraction mechanism. The ladder has been turned into a treadmill. Now that we know why even the most disciplined players are losing, we must look at what happens when the system moves from your bank account to your very survival. Now that we know what fails, we must see what is being harvested from those who have nothing left but their next 8 hours of labor. That was the theory. Here is what happened in practice in late 2024. While the headlines focused on a cooling housing market, a new and more intimate form of extraction was being deployed. It is called the financialization of survival. Consider the case of Janet. She's a 60-year-old retired teacher who spent 30 years in the classroom. She represents the medical debt trap. In 2023, the credit bureaus announced they would remove medical debts under $500 from reports. This was presented as a victory for the consumer. It was actually a diversion. The underlying debt did not vanish. It was sold to third-party financing companies. Janet now spends her mornings at a kitchen table covered in meticulously filed billing statements. Her surgery was successful, but the financing plan carries an interest rate of 12%. To service this debt, she has begun skipping her heart medication. Think about what that means. The system is no longer just extracting her surplus wealth. It is extracting the biological maintenance of her body. This is not an isolated tragedy. Over 100 million Americans carry medical debt that is being systematically converted into private high-interest liabilities. Now look at the shadow class. This is the group of workers using early wage access apps. These platforms are marketed as a corporate wellness benefit. They allow you to withdraw your earnings the moment your shift ends. It feels like convenience. It looks like a simple notification on your phone. But when you calculate the fees as an annual percentage rate, you find yourself in a territory that would be illegal for a traditional bank. The effective rate often exceeds 300%. This is the mechanism that traps the worker in a cycle where they are always paying for the previous week of labor. At 4 in the morning, millions of people are checking their screens to see if $30 has cleared so they can buy the gas required to get to the job that pays for the gas. This is the 300% tax on being alive. The pattern is now visible across every layer of society. Failure was unthinkable until 1929. It was unthinkable until 2008. And it is happening now in the silent algorithmic extraction of 2025. This is the third point in the triad. The observation has become a law. This is not history. It is the current operating system of your life. If you are using these apps or servicing these plans, you are not a consumer. You are a source of predictable interest income for an architecture that has already priced in your exhaustion. The question is no longer if the system will fail. The question is, what is being harvested from you while it continues to function? We must now examine the single framework that unifies these different traps and explains why the destruction of middle-class wealth remains invisible to the people experiencing it. And here is where it gets uncomfortable, because there is a pattern that connects everything we have discussed. We have looked at 10 separate mechanisms of extraction from car loans to medical debt to digital wage access. On the surface, they appear as isolated industry practices or results of personal misfortune. But they are not. This is not conspiracy theory. This is structural analysis. To understand why the middle class is evaporating, you must understand the principle of debt to standard of living arbitrage. Think about what that means. For 5 decades, the cost of the basic components of a functional life has moved on a vertical trajectory. Housing and education and healthcare have become exponentially more expensive, while wages have remained horizontal. This created a structural deficit that is the engine of the modern economy. In the past, debt was a tool used to acquire assets that produced income. Today, debt is the subscription fee required for the middle class to maintain the appearance of their own status. The gap between what you earn and what it costs to simply exist in a developed society is bridged entirely by the instruments we have analyzed. This is the arbitrage. The system captures the difference between your stagnant income and the rising cost of social participation and then sells that difference back to you at interest. You are not buying a car or a degree or a home. You are paying a perpetual fee for the right to access them. Convenience and safety are not the same thing. They are often opposites. The seamless interface of your banking app is designed to remove the friction of the transaction because friction is where reflection happens. Without friction, there is only the flow of your future labor into the present. This is the vampiric infrastructure in its final form. It is a legally sanctioned architecture that converts your time into a perpetual stream of extraction. It is invisible because it is presented as choice. It is silent because it operates through the very tools you use to manage your life. But the forensic reality is that the modern worker is no longer an owner of assets. They are a tenant of their own existence. This is not a story about bad choices. It is a story about the math of a system that requires your insolvency to function. The interest paid over a lifetime is the tax you pay for the privilege of working until you can no longer function. We have demolished the belief that this is about discipline. We have shown that it is about design. The ladder of social mobility has been replaced by a treadmill of interest payments. Now that we can see the entire machinery in operation, we must recognize that the destruction of wealth is not a side effect. It is the goal. We have reached the point where the arbitrage is nearly complete. The question is no longer how you can win. The question is how you can survive a system that has already priced in your exhaustion. Let me be precise about the magnitude of what we are facing. This is the vision of a world where you own nothing but are responsible for everything. We have stripped away the layers of the narrative. We have looked into the heart of the machine. Now we must look at the person standing in the center of it and decide what remains of their future. So what does this mean in practice? After documenting the 10 layers of the vampiric infrastructure, the most common response is a sense of strategic paralysis. If the architecture is designed to harvest your future regardless of your effort, you might ask what agency remains. Let me be precise about the nature of the alternative. It is not a single investment or a secret bank account. It is a total structural adjustment of your relationship to the financialization of life. I am not recommending this. I am documenting that it has happened for those who have successfully reclaimed the margin of their own time. The first framework is the ownership of depreciation. Think about what that means. In the modern system, the car and the phone are the primary extraction points because they lose value the moment you touch them, while the interest on them remains fixed. The alternative is the radical decoupling from new assets. This means operating exclusively with secondary market tools where the depreciation has already been paid by someone else. It is the decision to drive a decade-old vehicle that you own in full, rather than a late-model SUV that owns you. The second framework is the rejection of the convenience-to-debt ratio. This is the understanding that every frictionless button on your phone is a gatekeeper. To exit the system, one must reintroduce friction. This involves the return to cash basis or debit-only transactions and the deliberate abandonment of the credit score maintenance tax. This path is often criticized because it limits your ability to borrow. But that is exactly the point. The limitation is the protection. By making it difficult for the system to lend to you, you make it impossible for the system to extract from you. However, there is a catch. None of these strategies are perfect. To opt out of the debt to standard of living arbitrage is to accept a lower perceived status in exchange for higher actual autonomy. It is the trade of convenience for safety. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Every alternative involves a redistribution of risk rather than its elimination. But as we return to Mark in Raleigh, we see that the greatest risk is not the loss of status. It is the loss of the future itself. Return to Mark in his townhouse in Raleigh. It is late now, and the quiet of the suburb feels heavy with the weight of the math we have uncovered. He is sitting at his kitchen table looking at his phone, but he is no longer seduced by the seamless interface. He is looking at the buy now pay later notification for his groceries, and he finally sees it for what it is. It is not a convenience. It is a claim on his Tuesday morning shift 3 months from now. He looks at the SUV parked outside, and he realizes it is not a trophy of his hard work. It is a rolling extraction mechanism carrying thousands of dollars of debt from a vehicle he no longer even drives. He is 32 years old with a respectable salary, and he has realized that he owns nothing. He is a tenant of his own existence, paying a perpetual subscription fee for the right to appear successful. This is the moment of structural clarity, where the narrative of personal choice evaporates to reveal the architecture of the machine. There is a fundamental difference between access and ownership. Access can be revoked, and for Mark, the revocation has begun. Think about what that means. The convenience he was sold was the very friction that would have saved him. Convenience and safety are not the same thing. They are often opposites. This is not a story about the misfortune of one man in North Carolina. It is a forensic map of the infrastructure designed to own your future before you even live it. This is documented history and structural analysis. It is not financial advice or a recommendation. I am documenting that these patterns are the current operating system of the global economy. We study these fractures not to find a simple exit, but to understand the terrain before the ground gives way. If you can see the machinery, you are no longer its fuel. This channel exists to study the fractures before they become fault lines. Subscribing is an act of intellectual self-preservation. It is the decision to position yourself with anticipation rather than reaction. The patterns of extraction are not finished. They are accelerating into every corner of your survival. We will be here to document the next transition. The pattern is already in motion.